Me right now is Georgia Senator, a member of the Senate Budget, Banking, and Armed Services Committees, David Perdue. Senator Perdue, it's always a pleasure to see you. Thanks for being here.
Good morning, Maria.
So can you really say that flat out, we do not work with the Chinese military, when in fact the company is working with Chinese companies, state-owned companies, the Chinese government, and isn't their number one priority their military?
Well, I lived over there, Maria. I've worked in China, as one of your guests has, Mr. Nardelli, there over the last few decades. And I can tell you this, if you work with any Chinese company, you're working with the Chinese government. I mean, they are so vertically integrated. I spent a day with Jack Ma at Alibaba last year, and you can see that the data and all of the things that they're working on are all vertically integrated with the PLA as well as the government. So I don't think any U.S. company can say that they're not working with the Chinese government unless they've done the study and review to make sure they're not doing that.
Well, especially since, Bob Nardelli, the Chinese military is the priority of the Chinese government.
Yeah.
You know, I mentioned civil-military fusion a minute ago, and that is because any innovation that comes into the Chinese government, first it is tested if it's going to work in the military, because their main goal is to be the #1 superpower militarily.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, the senator said it right. Anytime we went over to China, you're always going to Beijing. You're always meeting with the government first. If you want to, invest in a business, if you want to create a business, the senator knows that extremely well from his experience also. So it's totally transparent. I mean, you're dealing with the government to deal with any business over there, whether we were making cars or whether we're selling locomotives or power systems.
Yeah.
You're dealing with the government.
But once you understand that, Senator, you have to come up with another way to understand how the U.S. is going to work with China, right? I mean, like this trade deal. The president commented that a deal with China is not anytime soon. It's going to take a long time in terms of getting this done. So how should we look at China, given the fact that they want to beat us in everything, including becoming the #1 superpower?
Well, two things, Maria. If you look at the Made in China 2025, the Chinese mentality is such, it goes all the way back to Confucius and General Sun Tzu, that they don't tell you what they're going to do unless they've decided that you don't have the wherewithal or the will to stop them. And that's why I have to give President Trump all the credit in the world, the first president in the last 5 that has done anything to stand up and ask for a level playing field.
Yeah.
What President Trump is asking for is to stop stealing our technology, stop the forcing of technology, comply with the WTO, give us equal access, and stop the cyber war.
Right.
I mean, it's just as simple as that. But it's going to take a while to negotiate all this.
The Commerce Secretary, Wilbur Ross, was on with us earlier. Here's what he said about that just a few minutes ago. Is it fair to say it's probably a long time before we actually see deals here? What do you think, Secretary? Where are we?
The fundamental question now, though, is will they go back to the point where we were before they changed their mind and backtracked on some of the understandings that had been reached?
Do you have any optimism or encouragement that they are planning to stop the theft of IP? Isn't that one of the big ticket items? Real quick.
Well, the big ticket items are the structural reforms, the theft of IT, the unlevel playing field in procurement,
Yeah.
the subsidies, all those. But there's another, in some ways, even bigger issue, and that is, what is the U.S. enforcement capability in the event that they violate the agreements?
Right. So the enforcement has been talked about. You've mentioned that as well, Senator. I got to get your take real quick before we leave this trade conversation, because we want to get to the budget. Do you think USMCA is going to come to the floor?
Well, I certainly hope so. It's certainly a dramatic improvement over NAFTA. Both sides, if it went to the floor of the House, we think it would pass right now. We know
Yeah, but
it
what
would
if
pass
it
the Senate.
doesn't? Do we have a plan B, sir?
Well, not right now. I mean, it's up to Nancy Pelosi. I mean, the Speaker needs to put this on the floor. The American people really want this deal.
Capri.
Senator Capri Cafaro here, and I want to get your take right now on what's happening with the budget negotiations between Speaker Pelosi and Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. I understand that you are not in favor of a potential one-year continuing resolution, but it seems to me that we might be on a collision course here. We have Democrats that look to be unwilling to either have a short-term deal or cut spending. And we have, obviously the end of the fiscal year looming September 30th, and we're coming up against the potential of having to raise the debt ceiling. So what do you see happening here? And speaking of Plan Bs, is there a Plan B if we can't get a deal on the budget and we try to avoid a CR?
Capri, thank you. That's the question of the day here. Look, I am very encouraged that Secretary Mnuchin and Speaker Pelosi are dealing one-on-one. That was a breakthrough a week ago. They've made great progress. I'm hopeful that we're very close right now on the numbers. Look, this is what's at stake here. If we go to a one-year CR, the military is devastated. We've done it 186 times over the last 45 years since the Budget Act was put in place in '74. It's a draconian impact. It causes expenses in the military to go up dramatically. So the small differences that we have right now in domestic spending and in military spending are small in comparison to the increased costs that this will cause the military over the next decade. Now, here's the other thing that's ridiculous about this. We're talking about $1.3 trillion on the discretionary part of the budget. We spend $4.6 trillion in the federal government. It's time that we start dealing with the mandatory expenses of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, pension and benefits of federal employees, and the interest on the debt that's gone up dramatically over the last 2 years.
Senator Lindsey Bell here, just on that point, the budget deficit, we've had a deficit for a very, very long time, going back to the 1960s. There's only been 2 times where we've had a surplus. It was the late 60s and then late 90s into early 2000s. Does the deficit even matter at this point?
Well, of course it matters. At $22 trillion, there's $60 trillion of sovereign debt in the world. We're 5% of the world's population. We have 1/3 of the sovereign debt. You know, I think it's about 20% of the sovereign debt out there today is at negative interest rates, Lindsay, as you guys know. So this is a period of time with 4 balance sheets of central banks at the largest they've ever been. It's a very concerning time right now. It's uncharted territory. But I can tell you this. The bond markets are not going to continue to support this sort of explosive growth in our debt. We've added $450 billion of interest expense just in the last 2 years in the 9 Fed fund rate increases. And so it's time that we deal with it, and we can deal with it. The resources are here to do it. We don't have to cut Social Security, but we can save Social Security, whose trust fund goes to 0 in 14 years, and Medicare's trust fund goes to 0 in 7 years. Look, we can't hide from this any longer. That crisis is rushing at us like a freight train right now. Thanks for the question, Lindsay.
And you think you can save them. Your op-ed in the Defense Times say that the U.S. military is going to pay the price if no budget deal is reached at a time when you've got all these new threats across the world, right?
Well, that's exactly right. China doesn't have this problem. Russia doesn't have this problem. And right now, China is spending, if you adjust for purchasing power parity, they're spending about the same amount as we are on their military. And so right now, we can't afford to do this to the military. Last year was the first time in a decade, Maria, that we actually got the government's funding for the military without having to use a continuing resolution. It causes expenses to go up dramatically. Recap, rationalization, and also readiness, it just destroys those efforts that we're trying to rebuild the military right now.
Yeah, Senator, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Senator David Perdue joining us there in Washington.